the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, rogue agents swept up in the search for an ancient relic, an old weapon that stands ready for a galactic emperor to wield, and the dawning of a new era here at the Baen Free Radio Hour headquarters. All that plus our ongoing audiobook serialization of John Ringo's Live Free or Die, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I'm Baen Associate Editor David Afsharirad. Those of you who listened to or watched the podcast last week know that it is the end of an era here at the Baen Free Radio Hour. After 8.5 years and over 500 weekly shows, podcast host Tony Daniel is stepping out of the recording booth and riding off into the sunset. We salute his work, bringing audiobooks, publishing news, and most of all, in-depth interviews to our audience, in addition to his off-kilter sense of humor. To say he'll be missed is an understatement, but as the saying goes, the show must go on, and we're excited to bring you the next generation of the Baen Free Radio Hour. Going forward, I'll be your producer and host, and I'll also be conducting the occasional author interviews. But the bulk of the questions will be asked by a rotating panel of guest interviewers, the first of which we'll meet here in just a moment. It's an exciting time here at the Baen Free Radio Hour, and we hope you'll stick with us here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy as we keep reaching for the stars. For this first show after Tony's departure, we bring you the inimitable Les Johnson talking about his new novel, The Spacetime War. But, as Tony would say, first, the news. The fresh batch of e-arcs are in. First up, we have the new Tim Powers novel, Stolen Skies. UFOs in the skies of Los Angeles. With flying saucers on the move at the giant rock monolith in the Mojave Desert, grayling sightings at a cultist temple in the Hollywood Hills, a monstrous alien apparition in the Los Angeles River, and a harrowing midnight visitation on a boat off Long Beach Harbor, aliens seem to be invading Southern California. But what kind of aliens, and to what purpose? One thing former Secret Service agent Sebastian Vickery knows is that whatever their purpose, it can't be a good one. Now Vickery has learned something about UFOs that he shouldn't have, and naval intelligence, desperate to silence him, orders his old partner, Agent Ingrid Castine, to trap him. But Castine risks her life to warn Vickery, and now they're both fugitives on the run from both the US government and agents of the Russian GRU Directorate, which has its own uses for the UFO intelligence. With the unlikely aid of a renegade Russian agent, a homeless Hispanic boy, and an eccentric old flat earther, Vickery and Castine must find an ancient relic that may banish the alien species. The only problem is making use of the relic could also result in the destruction of Southern California in the process, up to and including agents Vickery and Castine. Next up, we have The Deep Man by Michael Merceau. Break the Shaper's hold and free the stars. The galactic imperium of the myriad worlds slumps into centuries of decadent peace enabled by a flood of advanced technology from the mysterious, non-human Shapers. Among the great families, only the once mighty clan of Sinclair Maru remembers the maxims of the warrior emperor Young Ai, ready to defend the imperium from any threat. Stubbornly clinging to the honor code, family prodigy Saif Sinclair Maru finds himself in command of an outmoded, under-equipped frigate of the Imperial fleet. With spies and assassins on every side, trusting only in his considerable skill and the bizarre competence of his companion Inga, Saif must complete his mission, restore the greatness of his family, and uncover the chilling plot to extinguish humanity's light from the galaxy. The stunning debut of an exciting new voice in epic science fiction. That was Stolen Skies by Tim Powers and The Deep Man by Michael Merceau, available now on Baen.com in e-arc format. For the month of October, we've got scary good deals on Baen Books Anthologies. It's the Anthology Galactica October ebook sale. Perhaps nothing highlights the ideas of science fiction and fantasy quite as well as the short story. Baen Books has long kept the short story alive and delivering the sense of awe and wonder SF and fantasy is known for. Throughout October, get these hot anthologies for a cool price. Get $2 off Weird World War III and Cosmic Corsairs and $1 off over 24 more anthologies. Check out Baen.com for details. The sale ends October 31st, and these discounts apply wherever Baen ebooks are sold. In just a moment, we'll be bringing you our interview with Les Johnson about his new novel, The Spacetime War. But first, I want to introduce you to this week's guest interviewer. You may know him as the co-author with Eric Flint of the Ring of Fire novels, 1636, Mission to the Mughals, and 1637, The Peacock Throne, among other short stories he's written for various Baen anthologies and other novels and projects he's worked on with other publishers. He is Griffin Barber, and we want to welcome him to the Baen Free Radio Hour team. Griffin, welcome aboard.
Thanks very much, David. I appreciate it.
So you've been on the podcast before talking about your own work. What was it like being on the other side of things, getting to actually ask the questions?
It was interesting. It certainly was a different aspect of interviewing and that kind of thing. I've been a police officer for most of my adult life, so part of that was doing a lot of interviews, but then to be interviewing someone that not to get the facts or something like that, but to get their take on their own work was interesting.
Yeah, and so you interviewed Les Johnson. Had you met Les before at any conventions?
I think we were introduced in passing at, say, LibertyCon or one of the conventions, but I never had any kind of lengthy conversation with him, and it was certainly impressive to read his resume and to become aware of what his background is in science and NASA, et cetera.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's such an interesting guy. I've never interviewed him for the podcast, but I think at some Baen room party or something at Dragon Con or something, kind of was in his orbit. And it's such a cool guy to talk to because of, like you say, obviously his books, but his background in science and engineering and working on solar sails. Did you guys get into any of that? Like what how his science and engineering background, because I know it really does inform his fiction a lot.
Yes, to a small degree, and mostly in the lead up, because one of the things we had to do was to he had his resume, as it were, for us to read and review, and it was very, very lengthy. So we kind of cut out a few things that were like we judged were we could do without for the purposes of this particular interview. But really impressive stuff, and his career has spanned so many years, and then to have these active missions that he's got coming up that he's in charge of as far as the lead scientist for them or lead investigator for them was really, really impressive and interesting to kind of hear that inside baseball about how things go on at NASA. And part of that informed his work was also the social aspects of it, or the bureaucratic aspects of being a part of the National Aeronautics and Space Agency.
Right. Well, that sounds like something to look forward to in the interview coming up. We're going to have you back in a few weeks talking about the new Ring of Fire entry, something you know a lot about, that series. That's 1637, Coast of Chaos. So we're going to look forward to that and just having you around to do these guest interviews. We want to welcome you to the team again.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Let's take a look at the interview. Griffin Barber talking with Les Johnson about the Spacetime War.
Hello all and welcome. I'm Griffin Barber, guest host for this edition of the Baen Free Radio Hour. Today I'm with Les Johnson, author of The Spacetime War. Les Johnson is an author, futurist, and NASA technologist. Publishers Weekly noted that the spirit of Arthur C. Clarke and his contemporaries is alive and well when describing his first novel, Mission to Metheny. Nor is his contribution solely in fiction. Graphene, the super strong, super thin, and super versatile material that will revolutionize the world, was co-authored with Joe Meany. He is an elected member of the International Academy of Astronautics, a fellow of the British Interplanetary Society, and a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, the National Space Society, and Mensa. In his day job at NASA, Les is a principal investigator of 2 interplanetary space missions at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. The first, Near-Earth Asteroid Scout, scheduled for spaceflight in early 2022, will use a 925 square foot solar sail to propel a small spacecraft to rendezvous with an asteroid. He's also been a subject matter expert for film, TV, and certain documentaries. 2021 is a big publishing year for Les, with Saving Proxima's August hardcover publication by Baen, the reprinting of the Going Interstellar Science Fiction and Science Fact anthology in September, and now the Spacetime War. Welcome, Les.
Well, thanks, Griffin. Good to be here.
So we're here again to discuss the Spacetime War, and I wanted to start off with kind of an odd question. What is for you the coolest thing in the Spacetime War? The thing that made you excited to tell the story? Why was it so exciting for you? That kind of thing.
Well, for me, I guess not to. I don't want to give too much away for folks that haven't read the book, but what the coolest thing for me was playing with the big reveal, I guess is what I'm saying, in the story that comes from our understanding of space-time. And as a physicist, I like to play around, well, science fiction reader, science fiction writer, ever since I can remember, asking the what if questions. And as we start thinking about deep space travel and some of the weird stuff that we're coming to understand about how our universe works in general relativity, you have to wonder if there aren't some other things we have yet to uncover in those theories that are unexpected twists to our understanding of nature. And so there's a bit of a plot twist in here, which I don't want to give away before people have had a chance to read the book. But when you read the book, you'll find out the mystery that gets uncovered. To me, that was what I was most excited about, was the quirk of nature that I reveal, which may or may not be a real quirk of nature. Remember, this is science fiction.
Yep. Interesting. So when or how did it strike you? Is this something that's been along with you while you, I understand you got your master's back in the 90s or late 80s?
That's right. I've been around a while. I'm follically challenged. So
I resemble that remark.
Yeah, I think we both do. Well, actually, I have to give a shout out to the author, Sarah Hoyt. Sarah and I talked about collaborating on a novel for quite a while. And she and I battered around the idea for this book a few times. And then she got involved. I think she had a book that she was writing with Larry Correia at the time, and didn't have time to go forward with the novel. And she said, why don't you just go ahead and do it? And maybe we can collaborate on something else. So I give her an acknowledgement in the book. She really helped develop the upfront ideas for this. So no, I can't say that this particular plot twist was solely a creation in my own head of a few years ago. Now, all the characters and the story that surround that are, but the other was really a joint effort between Sarah and me.
And so speaking of that kind of aspect of it, I was impressed by your ability to teach the basics of some of the rather complex science in the Spacetime War without throwing me out of the story. Sometimes you get some folks, when they're, some authors tend to be so enamored of whatever research they've done that they tend to expound on it and lose the thread of the story. You didn't do that in the Spacetime War, and I was wondering if teaching is part of the intent of your writing, or simply just a natural byproduct of it.
I think it's a natural byproduct of it. As a graduate student in physics, you had to teach, but as you mentioned, that was quite a while ago, and I enjoyed that. But what I enjoyed the most about teaching physics to undergraduates when I was a graduate student was I taught 3 levels in my time as a teaching assistant. I taught intro to physics for physics majors, and that was terrible because they already really knew it all. And so they just had to check the box so they could get onto a future class. Physics intro for engineers, and that was real frustrating. No offense to my engineers in the audience, but they weren't really interested in the underlying physics. They were interested in getting the right answer to get ready to take that next engineering class, right? And I understand that. But the one I really enjoyed was teaching introductory physics without much math, to the arts and science students. And the reason for that is because when I would explain things, and apparently I have a talent for doing that, I've done it a lot over the years at science fiction conventions, giving technical talks, and in my nonfiction writing, is I really try to make complex subjects understandable to the average person. And I'll just give a quick example as to what gave me the realization I could do that. And that is when I was able to explain to these students why the doorknob is located on the opposite side from the hinge. And why, and that you could actually calculate using mathematics the torque and figure out why you do that and why it makes the door easier to open. And I remember teaching that in all 3 classes, and the physics students were like, yeah. The engineers were like, okay, I'll just calculate. The arts and science students were like, really? Math can do that? And I loved it. I loved that light bulb going off. And so when I'm writing the fiction, and as noted by Publishers Weekly and also on this book, I'm not used to seeing books that have the recommendation of verisimilitude, but anyway, it's kind of a 50-cent word for a book cover. Yeah, but it's something that I really like to do, because science fiction is what if, it's gee whiz, it's wow. Right. And I want to take the science into science fiction and make it so everybody can understand it and get that sense of why it's wow.
Very cool. And you certainly conveyed that in the book. I appreciated it considerably, given that I'm one of those arts students. And
it's great. You're my kindred spirit.
So I also particularly enjoyed the kind of the multinational and multicultural aspects of the characters and the polities that you present in the Spacetime War. Is that something that you see as a natural outgrowth of the community of space scientists and engineers you work with today, or it's something to be hoped for, but not really present currently?
There is a lot of international collaboration. And I have to say that, of course, I have to give this caveat whenever I'm interviewed. All of my writing is not endorsed by NASA. It's all me. I do it on my own time. Yep. It's a way I relax from a very math-intensive day job, right? Is to use the other half of my brain and write and read. But it's been influenced by my day job. For instance, there is a scene where one of the Earth colonies is attacked on Nico, which is a Japanese settlement that's out there. That whole chapter was influenced by a project I worked on with Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency that brought me to Japan multiple times over about a 4-year period. And getting to know the university professor I was working with, the people at JAXA, touring the Japanese museums, talking to new friends that I met there, learning about their history, their culture, really influenced that particular chapter. And I had so much fun putting that chapter in. It was terrible what happened to them. But I guess I was channeling John Ringo a little bit maybe on that chapter. But it was heavily influenced by that. And I also believe there's a heavy influence in my writing about the country of India. They feature prominently in both Mission to Metheny and the Spacetime War, 2 different universes that I've created. But I really believe they are a rising global power.
Yes.
And right now people are preoccupied with China, but I really firmly believe that India, being a democratic country with immense talent, is going to be a major player on the global stage and in space.
Yeah, I fully agree. The historical alternate history we were talking about before we went on was it's centered around India in the 1632 universe. So yes, I'm very much aware of how much potential resides in that country, and as a democracy, how important it is that we recognize that going forward that they can be a powerful partner for exploration and any other number of important international things that we're going to be facing in the next coming years.
You know, Griffin, I want to shout out something else too. When I was writing the book, I was a little nervous because I was featuring other cultures. And in today's hypersensitive world, I wanted to make sure that I didn't get something wrong or unintentionally do something offensive, right, in the chapters. So I have some dear friends who are from Japan and from India, and they were among my beta readers. And when I sent the book out to them, I asked them specifically, hey, tell me if I got something wrong when I'm describing the people and places and culture and such. And also let me know if I've accidentally done something offensive, because I'm not trying to, right? And I received really good feedback from them. And I've acknowledged them in the book that it was wonderful to get their enthusiastic responses about what I'd written.
Yeah. Well, and you have primarily two primary protagonists, and one of them is not only female but also the Indian and an officer in a very science-intensive STEM field. So yeah, I can see where you've made those active measures to and make sure that it was accessible to as many people as possible. It's very well done.
I tried. And I wanted to make it as correct as I could culturally.
Right. And it comes through again. I having some knowledge of Indian history and that kind of thing. It was very impressive, as well as Japanese history and witnessing their technological advancements. And then this, as well with the Chinese. I mean, everybody's pretty much representative.
Oh yeah.
In it, and sometimes to their detriment. There's a bit of the Commonwealth thing going on that's pretty fascinating as far as the laws and that kind of thing. And one of the major things that you throw in the way of one of your antagonists is a internal difficulty, which is I'll try and again trying to avoid being spoilery, but I really thought that that having been in law enforcement for 20 years. The internal investigation for good things that you've done, but have been completely either misconstrued or intentionally viewed in the worst possible light was something that resonated for me as a reader. So I was really excited by your representation in that aspect of it. And again, without getting too spoilery.
Well, I also have to throw in a thanks there. There's a fellow that goes to my church who is with the Judge Advocate General's office at Redstone Arsenal. And when I wrote the legal investigation that was happening, he was my beta reader. Is this how it would work? And he provided some really, really good feedback. So kind of shifting gears a little bit without getting too spoilery, again, we want to avoid any of those spoilers for your readers, but your book brought to mind certain aspects of Joe Haldeman's The Forever War for me. Wow, I'm flattered. Great book.
Was it at all influential in your writing of the Spacetime War?
Maybe unconsciously. That is one of the great books that I have on my top 10 list, right, of books that I read in my formative years, where I was formulating my you know what I'm talking about. It's the golden age, right? 12 to about 20. And that was when The Forever War came out. And I remember reading that book and being so profoundly influenced in many ways as a budding scientist by the whole science aspect of it, right? And the whole special relativity and the rate at which time passes thing. But I also realized it was a Vietnam War discussion and the whole notion of war. And so I was struck by how you could have such a multi-dimensional aspect of the story, and it hit me on so many different levels. So I have no doubt it influenced me, but it was not a conscious influence, right?
Oh, neat. It's pretty an amazing book, and he's done some other great stuff as well. But
oh, absolutely.
I thought that because I also just recently read The Forever War, reread it, and I was like, okay, I can see some connective tissue there.
I need to reread it. I haven't read the book since I read it the first time, and I have been rereading some of the old classics. Some hold up better than others, but if you recommend, I'll go back and check that one.
Yeah, that was one of the things. I mean, there, aside from the timestamps that he uses for what's going on at those in those eras, there's some really stuff going on that is not only this, it's the social commentary as well. That's pretty impressive in light of what's going on now and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it was it still has a certain value, and the science is pretty darn interesting too, as far as him describing that. And then again, the protagonist was in that book was a physicist, and both of your protagonists have to have a pretty intensive background in science and physics, orbital mechanics, and that kind of thing for this Spacetime War. So that was kind of one of the things that was going on in my head as I read through your book in basically a day and a half. So I really quite enjoyed it. So moving from the kind of the general aspects of the book and that kind of thing, one of the things that going on to the characters, there's a very human kind of love story at the center of this. And the obstacles to that relationship are not all represented presented by the main threat, but by organizations the lovers belong to. This seemed realistic to me and definitely handled. Was this the result of a conscious world building choice on your part, or did your characters just kind of tell you what was going to happen to them?
I think that they really just told me what was going to happen to them. When I was writing the story, I am very, very aware that hard science fiction writers have kind of a generic problem, especially hard science fiction novels written by men. And that is they're all plot and the characters tend to suffer a bit. And so I've really tried my best to go and do a lot of character development. And in the story, I wanted to have, well, this might be a big spoiler, but the way I think if somebody's going to ask me now how I want to describe the Spacetime War in a blurb is if I were trying to sell it in a pitch. Right. I think I would, and this may tell your audience a lot about the love affair that's in here, and maybe a little bit too much of a spoiler, is the Forever War meets Somewhere in Time. If you've seen the movie with James Seymour and Christopher Reeve, yep. Somewhere in Time, that is a tearjerker for me. Okay, right. And I'm the guy who likes to watch Pat. Okay, so for me to watch Somewhere in Time and in that mode, it's a wonderful story. But I wanted to have that feel because I think that two people who are in love that have obstacles like rival military services, not confronting each other, but separate military services and the challenges that would impose, but who really do deeply care for each other. Right. And have one obstacle after the next thrown in their path to keep their relationship intact. Not the least of which is career advancement. Yep. And I as your readers, when they read the book, as our readers uncover that part of the story, I know that's an issue. I have examples in my work life where you have what I call power couples, right? Yep. And when one of them advances a little farther than the other, it causes all kinds of institutional problems. Right. Because can you have someone be the boss of their spouse, right? And so you start, and also
not to mention clearances and that kind of thing too.
Oh yeah, plus and plus if you're deeply in love with someone and you also value your career, what if you're offered a career opportunity that could jeopardize your emotional relationship, right? And those are difficult choices that a lot of people have to face. And I wasn't trying to make all these obstacles fall in the way of the lovers here, but it just happened. Because the circumstances in which they found themselves in, it demanded it, right? So I tend to be a bit of a plotter, but I have to admit this book took a life of its own because the characters took it that way. And I tried really hard to make the characters the center.
Yeah, and it shines through. The relationship seemed to me very realistic and believable, and I really was keeping in mind what you were saying about how a lot of hard science fiction seems to get lost in the facts and just the facts man, as opposed to let's go to these matters of the heart, because why are we doing this in general is always kind of a heart thing rather than just a science thing or just a story thing. So why is it we're doing these things? I thought that was really deftly handled. So congratulations on that one.
Oh, thank you.
So a couple of other kind of more odd questions, but so tea or coffee?
I'm a coffee drinker.
Because
I know why you're asking that.
Right. So the characters, there's a good bit of back and forth about tea and particular teas that were fun.
Well, it's because I'm married to a tea aficionado. If you come to our home, which if you come our way, I have a standing invitation to anybody at Baen, just call me and we'll get together. We have a tea cabinet, and it's a wooden cabinet with shelf and has all these drawers and has all these different kinds of teas. And when we have discussion groups come to our home, it's called a Stammtisch, which is a whole other topic, but you can learn about it on my website, lesjohnsonauthor.com. I've got a section not just about my books, but also about this discussion group we host. And when we get about 20 people in the house and we're talking politics, religion, current events, that kind of thing, about a third of the group really like tea. And so we have a huge assortment of tea. And when we had my friend from India, is when I learned how discerning someone can be about how their tea is prepared.
So which of your characters would you want as your staunch ally from the Spacetime War?
As my ally, if I were involved with it, I would say I would want the crew on the Mumbai, the Anika's ship, because what I put that crew through is pretty astounding and resilient I can imagine a crew of a ship being. So I think that would be the kind of loyalty that I would hope I would instill or be a part of if I were in that kind of circumstance.
Including the AI?
Including the AI. And AIs are hard to write. That's one of the things that I have noticed, and there's been a lot of discussion about with my friends and I actually, as we've looked at the advances. I mean, if I say the Amazon Echo device's name, who shall not be uttered accidentally, it'll talk back to me, right? And everybody has their Siri and all these other things. What is it going to be like to really interact with a true AI that might be sentient or so close that we can't tell the difference? And my answer to that is I have no idea. So I just took my best guess in here, but I think we're all going to be surprised as to what that's really like.
I enjoyed the one aspect that I thought rang extremely true in your representation of them is that they're going to be trained to interact with us in a way that makes us most comfortable.
Yes.
So obviously they're going to be personable and a little charismatic and kind of know how to present to us. And whether they're doing that amongst themselves is an entirely different question and pretty valid as far as I'm concerned, as far as like, what is that going to mean? But the presentation to us as this users of this tool of artificial intelligence, assuming that we want it to be, and you even have it divided up in by nationality as to what their AIs are like or how anthropomorphic they present to their users. I thought that was really a clever way to do it, because it will be varied based on culture and cultural needs and norms, how those initial AIs or even extremely expert systems, how they'll interact. So I thought that was really cleverly done. And
it's almost a survival trait,
yes.
I think, because, if they start to be too intimidating, we'll pull the plug.
And if they're just not useful, like they said something mean to me that they want me to lose weight because it's the optimum thing for me. I must lose weight. Well, I don't want to do that.
Who are you?
Right? So them being able to an AI being able to actually discuss in a sensitive fashion with someone what changes need to be made in order to bring about the optimal result. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. And I think that the person who compiles that kind of personality matrix that allows the interface to work that way is going to be really a very rich individual.
You would think, because I think that's what it's going to take to get it commonly accepted.
Right.
Right. If it's just this impersonal machine that's godlike, I don't want to be around it. Right. So it's sort of like selective breeding in dogs, right? It's selected for big eyes and droopy ears and intelligence. And I think we're going to program that in, or else we're going to be too intimidated and we won't tolerate it. Absolutely.
And the aspect of it today, even, some people are concerned about science being, it's too intimidating. And so again, that the idea that we make it accessible through fiction, but also through the personalities, the programming that they're going to eventually end up doing on, at least on AIs that are, for civilian use, I think it's pretty fascinating stuff. And again, you handled it pretty amazingly with the individual cultural differences between them.
Well, I appreciate that. I didn't realize I did it that well.
I'm kind of sensitive to it because AI is one of my favorite subjects, if you can't tell from where we went with this. Sure. But So I was kind of like, ding, ding, ding. Oh, this is really cool. And the way that the Chinese AI interacts with everybody as opposed to the Commonwealth one, and the fact that when those AIs are forced to change or they're no longer available, they're missed.
Oh yeah, I think we're going to become very dependent on them. I had an experience in my home just yesterday where my smart plugs all over the house stopped working. And so my voice commands failed. And suddenly, darn, I got to unplug and turn on a switch and everything else. And it's amazing, you know, you get used to these crutches, and when they fail, it's inconvenient, right? And think how much it'll be when we're very dependent. I thought about that a lot. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Sky Alert, and it postulated what would happen if we lost all our satellites. Right. And you know, just to give you the shortcut answer, it would be a really bad day for everybody, for the economy, for the world, for global trade, for your personal life. And I think it's this interaction of us with technology is we've gotten so dependent on it that we may not realize how dependent we are, which is also kind of scary.
Oh, we definitely aren't aware of it. I mean, and especially in our day to day, because how many times when your the plug stopped working, did you repeat a command, just not thinking?
Absolutely.
Now, you know, that's what, you know, always gets me about that kind of aspect of it is like, okay, we aren't aware to the degree to which these conveniences are papering over things that we can either do for ourselves, but we just don't want to, or you know, we want it to be convenient, time saving, that kind of thing. So
absolutely.
I especially when it comes to military applications, you have that as well in the again, not to be too spoilery, but the close-in defense for these incredibly high velocity interactions between objects is basically given over to the AIs, and we have to trust that they can do it.
Well, that's the thing that when I've read a lot of science fiction and space battles, and I love sweeping space battles and space story, and they have humans reacting quick enough under these circumstances. Right. For me, it stretches believability.
Right, and that's
because at the kind of speeds that these things are traveling, there is no way that humans can react fast enough.
Well, that's the thing with the even today with the phalanx defense systems on ships and the U.S. Navy, you know, where they're shooting down cruise missiles that are supposed to be coming inbound towards them. So yeah, I mean it's even there now, and we're not even talking about the speeds possible in space. So yeah, I dug that, and I think again it's an excellent representation of what it might be like, and the human story in that. The interaction where they're basically just kind of, we just have to grit our teeth and face this. You know, once we've engaged, it's up to the AIs to kind of do things. So
we'll either come out on the other side or we'll be a fireball. You know, that's probably about it. And over the next 3 seconds, it'll all be decided.
Especially in opposing vectors where you're going at each other at these enormous speeds. So your engagement envelope and that kind of thing. So again, it was really, really impressive. I quite enjoyed that. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you said it was the whole crew, and that really does go through, but the AI having that specific role to fill was also for me really fascinating, and how that AI chose to fulfill their role or as they saw it. So yeah, again, kudos on those characters. And at risk of offending them, are there any people in your life who directly influenced the creation of any of the characters in the Spacetime War?
Well, what I find is that a lot of the characters are composites of people, so no, I can't think of any particular person in my life that I've Tuckerized intentionally here. Now, I've done that in other books. In Saving Proxima, there is a Tuckerization of a dear friend who I think I portrayed her in a good light. She seemed to have enjoyed it, but in this particular book, no. But I have to admit, in an early book I wrote with Travis Taylor, This person, it was Back to the Moon. There was a character that I modeled after someone I had just had a run-in with at work. But I didn't use their name, but boy, I was imagining it was them when I had something happen to them. So I have to admit, I think writers do that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but no, there's no particular person that strikes me.
And so with regard to those Winslow and Anika, the two protagonists, you had their background kind of extensively sketched out for the readers. How much of that was in the kind of world building aspect that where you were, okay, well, how do I figure all this out beforehand? Or was it, again, a kind of a natural outgrowth? Well, I need them to have this kind of background to do X, Y, and Z later on.
I think it was a mixture. I mean, going into telling the story, you know, when you have the overall plot concept, that's one thing, but then you have to put the people in the story, right? And so I knew I wanted to have the love story. I wanted to have the relationships. So I created the characters, but their background kind of had to be what it had to be to make them be where they are and to make the decisions that they made in the story. Right. And one of the things that was kind of fun for me was uncovering that background. Right. Because I've read stories where I get jarred out of the story when a character does something that doesn't seem like it fits with who they are or what I think they would be like based on what they've done so far. Right. And so when I would postulate, okay, why would Winslow do this? Well, maybe he would, no, that won't work, right? You know, that wouldn't be in character. And so I have to admit a bit of that was pantsing. Right. Because I would get into it and I'd realize, well, wait a minute, this character's going to react this way. What in their background could have prompted them to have this view or otherwise? And so, yeah, it's a mix.
Right. And that's one of the things I like about both characters, but Winslow in particular, is that he knows he's got a temper and he kind of keeps control of it. And, you know, they also, both of them, Anika and Winslow, are both kind of aware of the possible problems that their relationship might have, and yet that's not really as important as their relationship in many aspects. So I love that they're fully rounded out characters. I thought that was very well done on that aspect of the character development. Is there anybody that you kind of, as you were writing it, any of the secondary characters that you kind of wished you could tell a little bit more about, or that you did tell a little bit more about, and then had to like, no, it's not essential to the story, so I'm going to go ahead and.
Well, yeah, and in fact, this is something that was critical to the editing process when I submitted early draft just to get feedback from Tony Weisskopf. She mentioned that particularly the characters on Nico, the Japanese setting, that they were just extremely interesting characters, and it's a shame I couldn't have done more to be their story, but they were put in there for another purpose, which you found. Right. And so if I were to go back and say, ooh, who would I like to develop more? I think it'd be more on the history and development of the Nico colony. Right. And how that came about and what they were doing and all that. Because again, it's that Japanese culture thing. Right. And for some reason, when I went to Japan, they have technology so much more integrated into their lives than we do. Have you ever been to Japan by any chance? No. Well, I mean, even going to the bathroom is huge there. I mean, you go into the bathroom and you shave, and the mirrors are heated so that where you're standing to see yourself in the mirror, it's not fogged up from the shower, right? You go to the bathroom, everything's a bidet. You got to make sure you don't hit the wrong button or you get evergreen scent, right? I mean, everything they have this seamless integration. And every time I've been to Japan, I feel like I've stepped into a world that's 50 years in the future. Right. And that just fascinates me about how they just absorb this into their life and this view of integration of technology into their life. Whereas here in the US, you know, we have our privacy concerns. I'm sure there are Baen readers are you know, abhorrent to the idea of having these smart devices in your home, because what about privacy, right? And I understand that, and it's a balance of convenience versus privacy. But we as Americans tend to be, we embrace technology, but we're also put our hands up.
At arm's length. Yeah.
Yeah. And in Japan, they seem to be much more intimate with the technology. And that's something I think I'd like to explore in a future book is what would life be like when it's not just a part of your life as a tool, but it becomes, I don't know how to describe it, becomes part of who you are.
Well, it's that integral to your existence.
Yeah. While I was there, I mean, they were testing robots, the Asimo robot. They're developing these home healthcare comfort bots, and it's like, wow, imagine that. I just can't see that happening here. So no, I would like to develop Nico more.
And yet they still hold on to these traditions that are amazing as well. That's
oh yeah,
one of the things that is interesting about that particular cultural aspect is that they seem to be able to do both, and without a lot of the visible friction that we would see in other places and other cultures. So,
absolutely.
And
as we go to space, it's going to be just like that. I can't imagine that we're not going to have. It's not going to be this. And as an American, I mean, in my books too, you don't know what ethnicity somebody is unless you look at them, right? And because they're an American. And that's my ideal view of what our future in space will be like, is it will continue to be this agglomeration of all the world's ethnicities and cultures. But other countries aren't going to be that way. And I think when you look at the bridge or the crew of a Japanese ship, it's going to be mostly Japanese people, right? And India, it's going to be mostly people who are ethnically from the subcontinent of India. Right. Whereas in the US, it's going to be people who are American in political philosophy and worldview, but they're going to be multiple ethnicities that are going to be there.
Or the Commonwealth as well. Yeah.
And the Commonwealth, that's right. They're a little bit more segmented, but they'll have more integration into it. Right. And I like the Commonwealth. And of course, I debated whether or not to actually call the ship by the name that I did, because I was influenced by Horatio Hornblower. Right. And when I realized that very few writers had actually adopted that view, I have to admit, I harken back to the Hornblower series in writing about Winslow Price and the Commonwealth Navy. So
there you go, a little tidbit for the fans, right?
Yep.
One of the things that kind of going back on the technology and aspect of it as
sure.
Well, the fusion drives ID, or being able to ID them by their fusion drives, is that an actual thing, or is that a projection that that you would be able to identify based on their output of certain elements, that kind of thing? And
it's a real thing.
It's a real thing,
and it's based on, and this is all publicly available stuff right now, that the U.S. Counter-terrorism groups, whatever, there is a pretty extensive radionuclide database, right, which basically says if a bomb goes off somewhere, we will be able to know by sampling the byproducts of the damage, the radiation that's emitted, in what nuclear reactor anywhere in the world the nuclear fissionable or fusionable materials came from. And because they all have their unique signature by the place that they were made. Right. So if some terrorist group gets a dirty bomb and sets it off somewhere, we would be able to say, "Oh, this is uranium that came from this reactor in this country, and it's from that unique signature." And the same would be from a fusion drive or on a spacecraft. Right. That if you look at it with the right instruments, which would be spectroscopy, you would be able to pinpoint like a fingerprint the ship, because each reactor is slightly different in its history and its ability to process these things, that you'd be able to tell. Cool.
Yeah, that was one of the more I'm always interested in, like, vessel identification. That kind of thing is always interesting, because the VIN system that we use on our vehicles and is it's a challenge, let's put it that way.
Well, it's an artifact of technology from 80 years ago, right, or 70 years ago. That's how we used to do it, and we still do it.
Right.
But for space drives, now on chemical engines, maybe somewhat, not so much, but anything nuclear, it's going to have a unique characteristic, unique signature. Yep.
And you're the fusion versus fission, you're fairly sure that that's the case as well. Is that right? It is definitely the case.
It is definitely the case.
Cool.
In either case, you'll be able to tell a unique fingerprint.
All right. So we're kind of approaching our last few minutes on this. I know you have other things to do with your day, but is there anything we didn't touch on or that I didn't ask about that you wanted to discuss?
Well, first off, I love spending part of my day talking about books and space and future and AI and space travel and all those kinds of things. So I appreciate your wanting to interview me about this. But in terms of things about the book, just that I hope people are, when they read it, that they're entertained, that they want to turn the page and go to the next page, because that's what any writer wants, is they want the reader to be entertained. But as a hard science fiction writer, I also want you to come away saying, wow, I didn't think about that. You know, I think we as people in modern day 21st century America, we don't ponder the big questions enough. And in my books, they're written to entertain, maybe a little bit of educate, but I'd also like for people to put them down and say, you know, I hadn't really thought about that. What does that really mean in the big context of things? Is that really possible? And if people come away from my books with those three aspects, then I feel like I've been successful.
Well, you stole my last question. That was what I was going to say was, what do you want people to carry away with them from your having read your book? And that's I think that's an excellent answer.
Well, it's sincere. That's what I want, because I wouldn't be writing if I didn't want people to come away with that. And not much more I can say on that one.
So what other authorial projects do you have in the works? Or is there going to be a short story regarding the colony of Nico?
Well, maybe that's a real good possibility. Right now, I'm working on the second book in the Saving Proxima series with Travis. That's a 3-book series, and Travis and I are in the middle of the second book for that, which will hopefully finish up early in 2022. So I don't know when it would come out, maybe toward the end of next year. And it's a pretty sweeping book on what if questions. I mean, we're dealing with what's the nature of being human, right, in that series. And I've got some other ideas talked about with Tony, and there's a big one that we're going to pursue that I can't announce yet, but it's going to be quite an interesting departure for me and a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll be able to go public with that soon. But it's a new book project that Tony and Baen have just approved. I've also got a nonfiction book that'll be coming out next year from Princeton University Press called The Traveler's Guide to the Stars. And it's a popular science nonfiction book all about interstellar exploration. So I'm still busy writing some nonfiction while I do the fiction.
Excellent. And I look forward to seeing that. And did you give a time for that when it was going to be out? Or
I think it'll be out in 2022. The book is finished. I've submitted it to Princeton. They're doing the editing. So I would suspect it'll be out sometime next year. If it's okay to mention a book from another publisher, since it's nonfiction, I think that's probably okay. And I'm pretty excited because it's probably the most prestigious press I've published with. Princeton University Press, for me, is a big deal.
Yeah.
To be able to be published by them. I'm going to be able to check off one of those life, career goal achievement boxes, having a book accepted by them. Plus, I'm really hoping to get back to conventions next year. I've been going through withdrawal symptoms this last year and a half because I really thrive talking at conventions about space and space exploration and meeting with fans and just geeking out with everybody else there. And it's been a tough year and a half.
Do you have specific plans for that as far as what your next public appearance might be?
I do. I'm going to be a guest at Mid-South Con in Memphis in March. Of course, Liberty Con next June in Chattanooga. And I hope to return to Dragon Con next year. And if there are any other cons out there that are looking for an author guest or a science guest, give me a shout. I love talking to folks, and I'll give a lot of talks and meet with folks and move forward. I enjoy it.
So thanks very much, Les. I appreciate you coming on the show today and talking to us. Once again, the book is The Spacetime War by Les Johnson, out now from Baen Books in trade paperback and ebook. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's been a good hour.
Thanks, Griffin. I think we're in good hands here at the podcast with you behind the mic. And thanks to Les Johnson, of course, for talking with you. Now, we bring you the ongoing audiobook serialization of John Ringo's Live Free or Die.
We will now answer the 3 most common questions asked, and then we will terminate this call. By anyone can use the ring, do we mean that another species can use it to enter your system? Yes. Does that mean that hostile or friendly forces can use it? Yes. Are you allowed to block the ring? No. Goodbye. Hell, the president said as the phone went dead. Those were my top questions. NASA? Input? There's a real philosophical question whether there can be hostile species at the level to be able to use interstellar travel, the director said. The energies involved mean that survival as a species, if you are innately hostile, becomes difficult. If you can create a spacecraft that can go 300,000 miles in any reasonable time frame, you can more or less destroy a world. The biosphere, at least. Over time, hostile species will tend to wipe themselves out. That's a great philosophical point, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said. But the fact that the Gertull mention hostile species and not fighting near the ring probably means you're more or less dead wrong, pun intended. And according to my people, we can't even get to this thing. Oh, we can get there, the director said. We're working on a proposal for a manned spacecraft capable of the journey. Time and budget? The president asked, wincing. About 5 years, and, well, the budget is still being worked on. Under or over $1 trillion? The national security advisor asked. Oh, under, probably. 2 years after first contact. NASA has completed preliminary studies to the studies necessary to begin preliminary design phase of the bid phase on a potential ship to reach but not enter the Gudram Ring. Cost? $976 million. The Prime Minister of Britain picked up his phone without looking. It was the ringtone of his secretary. Yes, Janice? Actually, my name is Andrili Rirgo of the Glatoon. I am the captain of an exploratory vessel which has just exited your Gertull Ring. We come in peace and are interested in trade. The Prime Minister looked at the handset, then at the phone, which was registering a random string of numbers from the caller ID. Just as he was getting over the shock, the door opened and his secretary started waving her arms frantically. He was able to read her lips well enough to get the words, "gate emergence." The rather graphic hand motions, not to mention his current conversation, helped. He nodded at her and went back to his conversation. Well, Mr. Rirgo, did you say? Welcome to Earth. So, we really don't have anything they want? The president said. No, sir, the Commerce Secretary said. The computer chips they're offering are centuries more advanced than anything we produce. Enormous storage and something close to infinite parallel processing. They also integrate with terrestrial systems seamlessly, somehow. The IT experts are scratching their head as to how. But why they can just take over our systems is now pretty obvious. The chips are more like viruses than computers. But what they mainly want is precious metals. Specifically, the platinum group, which are pretty rare. Also gold. Do we mine those? The president asked. We do in small quantities, Interior said. More in Canada. Most are extracted from nickel and copper mining. Most of the world's deposits are in South Africa or Russia. Damn it. 3 years after first contact. This had better be important, the president said as he entered the Situation Room. The Secret Service had practically yanked him out of a meeting with the Saudi ambassador. We've had a gate emergence. the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said over the video link. "We've had those every few months for the last year," the president pointed out. "Mostly what I suppose could be tramp freighters, no offense to our Glatoon friends intended." It had quickly become apparent that even tramp freighter captains could access any electronic transmission. This had less to do with the super-advanced chips they traded for enormous amounts of heavy metals or anything else that seemed of some worth than their software systems and implant technology. Efforts to duplicate their information technology had so far been unsuccessful, and most experts put humans as at least 500 years behind current Glatoon technology. "Not Glatoon. The ship looks like a warship and isn't responding to our standard hails." "Is it big?" the president asked. He'd been elected on the basis of his domestic programs and wasn't quite up to speed on international affairs, much less interstellar. "It really doesn't matter how big it is, Mr. President," the admiral in command of Space Command responded. "We still don't get the engineering of the Glatoon reactionless drive or their power system, so we're grounded. If it's a warship, it's going to be able to hold the orbitals, and who holds the orbitals holds the world." "Oh." "All stocks of precious metals," the Secretary of State said. "Private, corporate, and governmental. We can keep enough stock of gold to keep the IT industry running, but that's it. We pointed out that it would make us more efficient at extraction, and they accepted that argument, but palladium, which turns out is important for hard drives, has to be turned over. That's for all the world's governments. Or our cities get what Mexico City, Shanghai, and Cairo got. Pony up and the Horvath won't nuke the rest of the world." "Technically, they weren't nukes," Spacecom pointed out. "They were kinetic energy weapons. Practical effect is similar, but no fallout, thank God." "Why those three?" the president asked. "Did they say?" "No, sir," Spacecom said. "But if you've ever seen a night shot of the world, it's pretty obvious. They picked up the three that are most noticeable. Since we're in a shield room, I'll point out that was a pretty poor choice on their part. I don't think they developed full intel on the planet. Doesn't really matter, but it's a potential chink in their armor. They're not gods." "True," the JCS said, "but we also can't fight them. Recommendation of the JCS is that we pay the tribute and try to get the Glatoon to intervene. We just can't fight them." "So, are we going to have them landing here?" the president asked. "If so, there's going to be a major security situation." "So far, we haven't even seen the Horvath," the Secretary of State said. "All discussion has been electronic or with their robots. As to where they are landing," she nodded at the Secretaries of Commerce and Interior. "We and Canada will ship our small amount of production to South Africa, which will handle the transfer," Commerce said. "There will only be landings in South Africa and Russia, and only to pick up refined metals. They appear to want to keep the world running so that we can fill their holds. Not that we can. The whole world's production amounts to a few dozen tons a year." Spacecom looked a bit irritated for a moment, possibly because his aide had touched him on the arm, then grunted. "What I don't get is why they're getting them on the planet," Spacecom said. "According to my experts, most of this stuff is to be found in asteroids. We've got a ton of asteroids just cluttering up the damn system. Most of what we mine is from asteroids that have crashed into the Earth. Why not just mine the asteroid belt?" "Possibly because then slaves don't do it for them," the president said dryly. "It's a matter of what your world calls realpolitik," the Glatoon representative said politely. The Glatoon was a bit over 1.5 meters tall biped with blue skin, red eyes, a vaguely pig-like head and snout, and a mane of white fur running down his back. He was dressed in an informal tunic for the discussion, which was, in diplospeak, non-binding and informal, which was where all the really serious binding resolutions were always hammered out. We have called for the Horvath to remove themselves from your world's orbitals, and they have chosen to ignore our requests. Since Earth is, to them, a very good conquest, relatively rich in heavy metals compared to Horvath, they won't leave absent either armed confrontation or possibly a trade embargo. Since Earth has essentially little or no value to the Glatun Federation, we have a sufficiency of strategic metals, and there are negative aspects to both choices on our part. We must unfortunately state that we remain neutral in this dispute. We have an extensive asteroid belt, the Under-Secretary of State for Interstellar Affairs said, throwing in her only bone. We believe it to be rich in the platinum group. For which you should be grateful, the Glatun replied. Most inhabited systems are mined out. However, our laws and long experience prevent us from mining your asteroid belt as long as there is not a centralized, or at least effectively sovereign, system government. The Horvath meet the definition, not the United States of America. Certainly not the UN. The Horvath have also offered the asteroid belt. Be equally grateful that we declined that offer. There are enormous problems with asteroid mining. It requires quite large lasers and fabbers and is fuel and energy intensive. To make it worthwhile for a Glatun corporation to invest in this system would require long-term leases. In the current security and political situation, the Glatun Federation would not permit such legally binding contracts. We're on our own, the USSIA finally said, becoming decidedly informal. We have 16 million dead, 3 major cities in ashes, and you're neutral? Since we are speaking frankly, the Glatun said, the decision of our policymakers is that Earth is simply sufficiently unknown and unnoticeable to take the chance of losing credibility in a minor dispute. The reality is that the Horvath, who are not much more advanced than Earth, would probably leave if so much as a single Glatun destroyer entered the system and ordered them to do so. However, if they didn't and shots were fired, much less loss of Glatun life, there would be questions asked in Parliament, AI queries, and of course the press would simply go wild. It is easier and safer to do nothing. Absent Earth becoming more of a hot topic in the Glatun Federation or becoming in some way strategically important, yes, you are on your own.
That was another entry in John Ringo's Live Free or Die. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to guest interviewer Griffin Barber, Audible.com, and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to Les Johnson for discussing his new novel, The Spacetime War, with us. And good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Shirerod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.